Connectivity is no longer just communications. It is in fact key to Malaysia's growth. Introducing the National Fiberization and Connectivity Plan, a 5-year plan that aims to bring robust, affordable and accessible high-speed internet to all Malaysians. This way, we can all enjoy more economic opportunities and a higher quality of life. U-Mobile fully supports NFCP and wants to enable all Malaysians to realize their unlimited potential. Find out how at u.my/NFCP.
This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
The BFM Breakfast Grill, connecting you to the top people and ideas. Presented by U-Mobile.
I'm Wong Xiaoning and this is The Breakfast Grill. Covid-19 has dominated headlines since January. At the heart of this deadly virus is China, an economic and political superpower with a population of more than 1 billion people. So joining us to discuss the economic implications of this on the Chinese economy and the wider world, we have with us Andy Xie, independent economist specializing in China and Asia, who was the former Morgan Stanley chief in Asia Pacific. He's also famous for accurately predicting the 1997 Southeast Asian financial crisis and also the US subprime mortgage bubble, which of course led to the great financial crisis of 2008. Thanks for being on the show this morning. Okay, let's start with China and COVID-19 because I think we've seen as many as up to 6% of the global population at one time under lockdown. And of course, this has led to disruption to the global supply chain. But my question today is how bad will it be on the Chinese economy?
Well, so far we see that the service sector is really suffering a lot. I think that most restaurants, even though now are open, but customers are not showing up. So a couple of weeks ago, the restaurants were shut because the government ordered them to. Now, even though the restaurants are open, people are not showing up. And you obviously have a transportation sector suffering a lot, like airlines and rail and so forth, long distance bus and so forth. So the service sector is half of GDP. And obviously, with the service sector like operating maybe at a 50% capacity, so the economy is suffering a great deal. So that's and that kind of a loss, you cannot catch up. When people don't drink coffee today, they are not going to drink more tomorrow. It's not like the manufacturing sector that when it gets better, you can just do overtime and catch up. I think the service sector loss is permanent. So this is a huge blow for the economy.
So you think that this Chinese government's target of 6% GDP growth for 2020 is unrealistic?
Oh, yeah, I think totally unrealistic. No, Chinese statistics are not reliable for the first quarter. Even the second quarter it should be negative growth, but the government is probably unwilling to admit that. So you're not going to see negative numbers. But I think the economy is very, very weak.
So what kind of policy measures do you expect the Chinese government to enact to kind of kickstart the economy again?
I think the current government really is not interested in kind of a growth per se. It's much more interested in stability. Stability is about keeping everybody afloat. So what's going on is that even though the businesses are suffering a lot, not many are going bankrupt, because the banking system is delaying debt repayment. And in some cases, the banking system is picking up the tabs, like the bond market is suffering and rolling over is difficult. So a lot of bonds are being repaid by borrowing from the banks. So the banking system is holding everybody afloat. So that is the Chinese phenomenon. When the economy is in recession, people, business not going bankrupt. It's just so it doesn't feel like a recession. It's because of the financial system is owned by the government, and the government can do that.
But there are risks there, right? Because corporate debt to GDP is already very high. So are we just increasing this debt bubble that might burst one day?
I think that from the government's perspective, as long as that I keep everybody afloat, there's no financial crisis. And what the government is, what are the constraints for the government? So in the end, the central bank can provide liquidity to the banks, so the banks can stay afloat, and the banks keep a business afloat. Maybe there is a pressure on the exchange rate, but the government can let the exchange rate slide somewhat to give the central bank sufficient freedom. So that seems to be the case for China, that they are avoiding a financial crisis at any cost, and that I think is doable in the foreseeable future. But unfortunately, what the government cannot control is what's going on outside. Like the government has been supporting the stock market since the coronavirus crisis. It seems the stock market was doing quite well until the U.S. market crashed. Then it's becoming much more difficult. I think in terms of financial crisis, it's going to be very similar. What's going to happen is that there will be a financial crisis somewhere else, like in Southern Europe or in the United States, and that will lead to another big global recession. So there will be that will impact China's exports. That's the real pressure will happen when that happens.
But if we rewind back to 2008 during the Great Financial Crisis, the difference was at that time, the Chinese economy was just beginning to boom, right? And they had the ability to consume, and they were really spending a lot on infrastructure. There was a lot of big projects that helped to keep actually the global economy afloat. But this time in 2020, would you say the picture is very different?
Yeah, I think that in 2008, the debt to GDP ratio was about 150% or so. Now it's 300%. China can only have a strong cycle of growth if the economy reforms and give the market more power and in allocating capital. Because China's next phase of growth is not driven by quantity, like building more infrastructure or housing. It's much more about building more products that are higher quality, high technology products, like what Korea has been doing for the last 20 years. So that kind of growth model is not the same as China's growth model. That it's government driven. So China needs fundamental reforms to launch another growth cycle that will take China's per capita income from $10,000 to $30,000, like Korea has done over the last 20 years. So and in 2008, the property bubble was small, and you measured by price to income ratio or overcapacity, like the empty flats. Now the property is way overstretched by any measure. So room of maneuver is very, very limited. So this is why the government does not have other objectives. It just wants to keep everything stable.
So the priority has always been social stability at all costs for the Chinese government then?
That's right, yeah.
The next thing I want to discuss is actually exactly that, the Chinese model of government. Because in your articles in the South China Morning Post, you say that COVID-19 does expose the flaws of this Chinese model of government. What do you mean here?
Well, a Chinese system is top-down. The Singapore system has had a big impact on China. The Chinese government sent a lot of people to study the Singapore model in the 80s and early 1990s. So, but China is a huge country, so you have this top-down system because that what you can do is always defined by what the leaders tell you. It takes a long time for the signal to transmit from the bottom to the top or from the top to the bottom. And it's a very bad system for dealing with a contagious outbreak like COVID-19. So this is why it has become so big.
And I'm curious, because some commentators have been saying that if there was free press in China, for example, this virus would not have spread so widely. The numbers of infections would be much less. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think the key is that you look at Wuhan, the pandemic that happened in Wuhan, basically out of control. It was due to lack of information. People were ignorant. They didn't know the risk. So they went about the usual way. So then, in this kind of a contagious disease, If you delay the information for 2 weeks, because the number of cases grows exponentially by with the time. So that's why that this lack of information, the local government obviously did not have the authority to deal with this in terms of how to handle releasing the information, and they had to report to get approval to do that. That was the key.
And we've also seen some flip-flopping in terms of how they report the number of cases. Do you get a sense that that was all being controlled? I mean, because you didn't want to create an alarm people, but at the cost of that is that we have no sense of how bad the virus really was in China?
Yeah, in the early days, obviously the cases were wrong, and in Wuhan. And again, that just made the people not aware of the risk, and so that really exacerbated the case. Then that before the lockdown, there was this trigger of panic. People suddenly realized how bad it was. So 5 million people left Wuhan, and took the virus to everywhere, and they locked the city down. Not immediately, but it gave some people the time to get out. So that was another big mistake. The mistake compounding the earlier mistake of not informing the people.
But do we have a sense of what people actually feel about this COVID-19 and the government's response to it? I mean, quite soon after the death of the whistleblowing Dr. Li Weiliang, we did see some social media postings, but otherwise very little dissent. I mean, what can you tell us there?
I think the Chinese people resign. I don't think that the Chinese people believe that they can change anything. So that seems to be the status quo now.
So despite all this has happened and the fact that your point is that this exposes the flaws in the Chinese model of government, you don't think that will change anything at all?
The way we see so far is that the doctors who warned the people being silenced, they have kind of disappeared. And the Shanghai lab that published the gene map for the virus, probably they did not know they needed the clearance with the highest authority. They just released that. I think it's on January 14th. And this lab has been shut down.
This is The Breakfast Grill, and this morning I've been speaking to Andy Xie, independent economist specializing on China and Asia, who most famously predicted the subprime mortgage bubble, which of course led to the great financial crisis of 2008. Up next, are we heading for a global recession? BFM 89.9.
You are listening to the BFM Breakfast Grill, brought to you by U Mobile.
BFM 89.9, you're listening to The Breakfast Grill. This morning I have Andy Xie, famous economist who predicted the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Just a moment ago, we were discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the Chinese economy and whether their model of government was flawed. Now, Andy, let's look at things from a global perspective. Is COVID-19 going to set off a chain of events that will lead to a global recession? What do you think?
I think a global recession is quite likely. Think about the tourism sector alone. Tourism actually employs 10% of the labor force globally. Now, in so many countries, tourism has basically been completely shut down. So this is what I see is that we are worried about a global supply chain in manufacturing. People kind of are complaining about getting their iPhone a couple of weeks later than usual. But that is not such a big deal compared to what's going on in the service sector. So I think that the global recession is very likely because of this COVID-19. Is different from SARS. It's 100 to 1,000 times as contagious, and so it stops people from going out. So there's not much we can do. I think this is reality. The global economy, it was weakening before, is likely to slide into recession in the second quarter. If the third quarter the crisis is still here, then we have a recession. If the third quarter the virus is gone, then maybe we can avoid a full-blown recession.
I mean, the fortunate thing about, if there's anything fortunate about COVID-19, it seems that the mortality rate is less than that of SARS. But I think it doesn't detract from the point that China, of course, is a global consumer today of commodities, whether that it be oil, minerals, and even one of Malaysia's major exports, palm oil. So if they don't consume commodities, in one of your articles, you say that might also cause a global recession.
All you need to is, in terms of if the recession is on or not, just watch the oil price. Oil prices dropped from the mid-60s to now the mid-50s because of the COVID-19. And if it drops to mid-40s, then it means the global recession is on. That would mean that countries like Russia and Middle Eastern countries will be in lots of trouble. So you have these multiplying factors going on. So it's not just a recession. The multiplying factor may bring financial problems. So you could have emerging market currencies, some countries' currencies sliding. That will trigger panic, and that's what happened to emerging market crisis before. So because that since 2008, no country really has cut debt. Every country has to build up more debt to support the economy. So the world is very vulnerable. And if we have economies goes into recession, the impact on the financial sector could be very significant.
But on the flip side, the U.S. economy seems to be on a very strong footing at this moment, right? We have record low unemployment, strong domestic consumption. But are you saying that COVID-19 is going to be that black swan event that derails the longest ever upcycle like we have seen?
Oh, yeah. I think the U.S. is a big bubble. And the U.S. will blow up first before China does. Most American government officials, they think China will blow up. So there's no need to handle China. China will blow up on its own. But actually, the U.S. will blow up first. Because the U.S. economy is a bubble economy. It's the stock market. The Federal Reserve is pumping the stock market to this variation highest ever in history, higher than in 2007 or in 1929. And the stock market is trading at over 150% of GDP, over $30 trillion until the last week's correction of $6 trillion. It's still way overvalued. So the economy depends on that. And if the stock market falls apart, I think the economy will be in trouble. So this is where people think that the U.S. economy is very strong, but actually, you look at the GDP may grow by nominal GDP by 4%, let's say less than $1 trillion. The stock market is up like $5 or $6 trillion. So this whole thing is being led by the stock market. This is where I think one of the most important, in addition to oil price, one of the most important indicators for global stability is the U.S. stock market. So if it bursts like in 2008, then the stock market will go down by more than 50%. Then when that happens, the U.S. economy is in deep trouble.
But the Federal Reserve seems to be very willing to keep this so-called equity bubble going. They just cut the policy rate by 50 basis points last night. And there is just so much cheap liquidity in the system.
Yeah. The Fed does not want to deflate the bubble. The Fed wants to keep the bubble up. You look at the Federal Reserve people, they mix with all these financial guys. They show up at the billionaires' parties. I think that these people are thinking that by keeping the bubble up, they will have a good life when they leave the Fed. That's what's going on. But this time, it's not the liquidity. It's the fear factor. And people think that once you have COVID-19 going around, people are worried about their life. So they're not likely to worry about their speculative positions. So this time it's not the liquidity issue. So I'm not sure the Fed can save it.
I'd like to talk about Malaysia because you are a long-term observer of Asian economies. And of course, here we just faced a political whirlwind. We changed our prime minister, have a new coalition government in power. And we seem to be an economy that seems to chug along quite nicely. But how do we avoid the risk of being left behind against what are perceived strong, more dynamic economies like Vietnam, and Indonesia? After all, we were an Asian tiger before 1997. Can we ever get back there again?
Malaysia is already a middle-income country. To go up, you have to do different things. In the early days, you could get growth through building infrastructure, building some export factories, and so forth. I think these days are gone. China's got the scale. Vietnam's got the cost. All the other countries need to find their own ways. And Indonesia hasn't got to the stage that they could compete aggressively on manufacturing export. But they could get there one day. And don't forget Bangladesh with a huge labor force, extremely low wage. So in terms of competing on cost, it definitely is not a way out for Malaysia. So this is where I see that Malaysia's economy needs to become much more sophisticated. In the last 20 years or so, we have had this commodity boom that has benefited Malaysia. Also, capital flow, people coming to Malaysia to buy properties. Those things have benefited the Malaysian economy quite a lot. But going forward, it's not clear that these things can keep the economy going. Does Malaysia need to become much more kind of self-driven, more products made in Malaysia, service products that are sold globally. So Malaysia's economic future depends on itself. So I think that if you want to have a sophisticated economy like South Korea is definitely the most successful, has become an advanced economy, making the best products in the world. So this is from an economy that was not known for quality and got so many problems. I think a really remarkable, successful transformation. And on the other side, you have Singapore that has adopted a different approach. It's opened a couple of casinos and promoted the offshore banking kind of a Monaco model. Singapore is small enough to live that way, but I think Malaysia is quite a sizable population. So I believe Malaysia needs to build a more sophisticated economy, and both in terms of service and in terms of manufacturing, and like mid-sized European countries. So I think that's still some way to go, and Malaysia has work to do.
On that note, Andy, thank you for your time. I'm Wong Shao-ning for The Morning Run, BFM 89.9.
The Breakfast Grill is brought to you by U Mobile, unleashing unlimited potential every day.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.